To today's video, where we're going to be talking about why embracing our uniqueness is going to make everyone safer. And also, the more kind of, I think, main message of today's video is going to be around how we can learn to embrace our uniqueness even in this world that is constantly making it feel like it is very unsafe for us to be our unique selves. And in this world where we are trained to see others' uniqueness as a threat, and where we are trained to see same as safe, and where a lot of us have been deeply shamed and blamed and made to feel very unsafe in our uniqueness and have been unsafe in our uniqueness. And how we can work through that, because that is real, that is something that actually happens, that can have a very, very profound impact on us. And we do need to learn how to support ourselves in embracing who and what we are if we want to have a life that's going to feel good for us. And like I said, this can be incredibly challenging when we have been through a history where our uniqueness has historically been something that has made us get a lot of rejection and get a lot of shaming and guilting and all the things that we've been through. So this talk today is going to be broad strokes about why embracing our own uniqueness is going to be a part of how we contribute to making the world a safer place, and how embracing our own uniqueness at bare minimum will make us individually feel safe, and how we can get to a place where we feel safer accepting who we are and how we are and our uniqueness, even when we have not been accepted by others. Okay? So this is what we are going to cover today. So again, first things first, if you want more content like this, I have a gabillion videos on YouTube. You can check out my YouTube channel, Perception Trainers, on YouTube. You can check out my website, perceptiontrainers.com. I have a bajillion blogs and things that I've written. I've got some programs on there. I've got the Mystery School that you can check out, which is $15 a month for a 5-year program. Everything's included. There's no levels or anything. It's all just that. And then one-on-one coaching, you can find my links in my bio, in wherever you're watching this. I'm sure you can find them, or you can just send me an email, just to put that out there. Okay. And last thing is, we are doing this live in the evening, so if the lighting is a bit weird, I apologize, and that's what's happening. It's just the sun is setting. All right. So here is the reality that most of us have lived. Most of us have lived a life where our specific way of being, our uniqueness, our personalities, our likes and dislikes, our way of expressing ourselves has somewhere along the line been the reason that we experienced being rejected. It's been the reason we've experienced being told that there's something wrong with us. It's been the reason that we've experienced being told that we're broken, that we're shameful, that we're causing harm, that we're bad, that we're fundamentally messed up. And that in order to have safety in this life, in order to have acceptance, in order to have love, we need to change ourselves. And again, we have talked about this over and over and over again on this channel, about how our experiences in our childhoods with our caregivers, these primary shaping experiences, where we were not allowed to express our emotions, where we were not allowed to express our feelings, where we were told that we were supposed to feel a way that we didn't, where we were told that, you're not allowed to be this way, you're not allowed to express this thing, you're not allowed to have these interests, these interests are evil, these interests are wrong, these interests make you a bad person. Or where we have experienced caregivers that just projected onto us an idea of who they thought we should be, this idea in their minds of who we thought they should be, and they treated us as though we were someone that we weren't. This is another form of rejection that a lot of us have experienced that we might not necessarily have been able to contextualize as rejection, because it wasn't an outright you can't be how you are, but rather it was a you should be this other way. And every time you are not this other way, you get treated like there's something wrong with you, or you get ignored, or you get invalidated, or you get spoken to like you are someone who you are not. You get treated as though you are interested in things that you are not interested in. You get, put into classes that don't align with anything that you're actually interested in. You're treated as though you are someone that you are not. These two forms of rejection, these two forms of being fed this message that who I am and what I am is not okay, is not allowed, is not appropriate, is not right, is not acceptable, got deeply programmed into our nervous systems as not just, I can't be that way because my parents don't like it. It's not just something that we can now, as an adult, be like, oh, okay, well, my parents didn't accept it. Oh, well, I can accept it now. It's fine. Because what was happening in our bodies, what was happening in our perceptions as children, when we were forming our base nervous system programs, when we were forming our base understanding of how the reality around us functions, when we were being rejected for our authentic expression, when we were being rejected in our emotions, when we were being rejected in what we liked and disliked, when we were being treated as though we were someone that we were not, we were taking that in as something that made us existentially unsafe. Okay, I'm going to say that again. We were taking that in on a nervous system level as something that made us existentially unsafe. Because to be rejected by our caregivers, to be treated like we were someone else by our caregivers, to be shamed and blamed and guilted in our expression by our caregivers, who we depended upon for everything, was a massive threat to our perception of what it took to survive. Okay? So being rejected in our early childhood by our caregivers, being in a situation where we were being reflected back to us that who and what we were is not okay, got deeply programmed into our bodies and into our nervous systems as I am not safe to be myself. I am not safe to be myself. Because when I am myself, it threatens my connection with these individuals that I rely upon for everything. Okay? And that, again, to our bodies, to our little child perception nervous system, was the most threatening thing, the most dangerous thing we could possibly experience. So then we started to develop an existential relationship with these parts of ourselves that we perceived to be the reason why we were being disconnected from the love of our caregivers. Okay? This cannot be understated. We were learning in our bodies that it was not safe, that we were not going to get our needs met, that we were not going to be okay if we got rejected. We were learning in our nervous systems that if we get rejected by caregivers, we are cut off from our source of everything. And we were being trained and taught that these things that I do, these things that I express, these things that I need are the things that get me cut off from my caregivers. And therefore, these parts of myself are dangerous. These parts of myself are parts of me that I am now going to develop shame about, I'm going to develop guilt. I'm going to develop all of these negative stories and assumptions and theories about why these parts are bad, even if caregivers aren't explicitly telling me why these parts are bad, right? So again, a lot of us experienced being rejected in our expression, and our caregivers didn't necessarily say, you can't be this way. You can't do this. This is wrong and bad. Rather, they just pulled away from us. Or they just said, oh, honey, just stop doing that. You can't do that. Or they weren't there for us. They weren't able to be there for us. They weren't able to be supportive. They weren't able to be loving and kind and compassionate. And whether or not that had anything to do with our behavior, we were perceiving the only reason caregivers would pull away from me, the only reason caregivers would not meet my needs, the only reason caregivers would not be there for me is because of something I'm doing wrong. So again, if we perceive caregivers pulling away from us, if we perceive caregivers not taking care of us, not making us feel safe, not taking our pain away, not helping us when we needed help, we couldn't perceive caregivers are imperfect. Sometimes they're just incapable. Sometimes they have a bad moment, whatever. We were perceiving, okay, what did I just do wrong that severed my connection? What was it about my behavior that was the wrong thing there that caused caregivers to reject me or not be there for me or not help me? We were looking for those patterns. We were perceiving them whether they existed or not. And we were then processing in our bodies and in our brains before our frontal lobes were developed, before our logic and adult understanding and concept of the world was developed. We were processing in our bodies, okay, these things are bad. These things are dangerous. These things make me fundamentally unsafe, and therefore I have to not be that way. And like I said, this is usually where shame, blame, and guilt were born. So even if caregivers didn't explicitly say, you can't be this way, you can't do this thing, if we perceived that the reason caregivers are pulling away from me is because of this, even if it was just caregivers were unavailable, or caregivers were incapable, or caregivers were tired, or caregivers just couldn't, if we perceived that it was because that, if we perceived that pulling away, we were going to come up with a reason for why that was happening, and we were going to look to our own behavior, and then that was going to be programmed into our bodies as being unsafe behavior, behavior that gets us rejected, cut off from our source, not safe. And so, like I said, this develops shame, blame, guilt, because in order to then stop ourselves from expressing that way, in order to stop ourselves from doing what was natural to us, from expressing our emotions as they naturally actually occurred, from expressing our desires as they naturally occurred, from expressing our creativity, expressing our like or dislike for something, we had to come up with a way of suppressing that, what was natural to us, what felt good to us. And it was that shame, blame, and guilt that stops us. So this is why I talk about how shame, blame, and guilt are childhood protective mechanisms. We shame, blame, and guilt ourselves because what we are actually attempting to do is augment our behavior so that we will be in alignment with what caregivers expected of us, so that we can be safe. That is where shame, blame, and guilt are actually coming from. When we have these stories of who I am, what I am, is not good, is fundamentally broken, is fundamentally shameful, is fundamentally unworthy of love, is fundamentally broken, wrong, bad, not meant for this world. All of those stories came because rather than being supported in our expression, we were rejected. We were abandoned. We were outright told that who and what we were was not okay, or we were perceiving that who and what we were was not okay, even if caregivers were just incapable, or we were pattern recognizing. When I am this way, when I do this thing, caregivers pull away from me. That makes me not safe, and therefore this part is bad, and I need to fear it, and I need to reject it, and I see it as evil. I see it as bad. I see it as wrong, because it really is threatening my survival. Does this make sense? We develop these shame stories, these blame stories, these guilt stories from a place of feeling like I am dependent upon these people for everything. The only reason they would not give me what I want and what I need is because there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my behavior. I am doing something wrong. So what is it that I just did wrong that caused them to not care for me, or to hurt me, to abandon me, to abuse me? And then how am I going to get rid of that? How am I going to stop myself from doing that and being that and expressing that without telling myself that it's the worst thing in the world, that it's shameful, that it's bad, that it's wrong? Because it's natural to me. That's what I want to do. So in order to stop myself, right, we have to have that existential threat story that then is going to get built upon and built upon and built upon as we move through our lives. Because again, this is how our perception works. Once we have a story in our minds that we believe to be true, generally speaking, our mind is then going to work in a way where it says, okay, that is the story. That is true. And this is the part that gets really tricky for a lot of us. The mind has come up with a story that this part of you is bad, wrong, shameful, sinful, because it is the reason caregivers pull away from you. So that's the foundation that we're working with. That's the deep core fear. This part of me is bad, fundamentally unworthy of love, fundamentally horrible. It is the reason caregivers are not caring for me. That's the story. And then our perception goes to work. Okay? Once we come up with that story, these parts of me are bad, wrong, awful, and shameful, perception starts to say, okay, that's the story, that's reality. Now I am going to look for all of the examples that prove that that is true. I am going to start to collect all of the evidence. So every time I go to express this thing, I'm going to be looking for caregivers to make a facial expression, or to pull away, or to do this or to do that. I'm going to be looking for how this correlates to being rejected, to being unsafe. And anytime I express myself in this way and I don't get rejected, I don't get hurt, the mind is going to filter that out. Your perception is going to start to get rid of all of those examples of where it was safe to be that way, or where you were okay, or where it wasn't that horrible. And it's going to hyper fixate and focus on the areas where that story is true. Because again, from our survival perspective, from a survival evolutionary perspective, when we are in a state of threat, the best thing for us was to be hyper aware of where that threat was coming from, of that threat being present, and to all the places and spaces where that threat might happen again. You see, the mind is going to start to look, to build a case for all the examples of how this part of you is bad, wrong, shameful, sinful, and leads to rejection. And it's going to be hyper fixated, hyper focused on seeing that and building that story because it's trying to protect you. It's trying to look for every little facial expression, every little moment, every little thing that could possibly be a threat to keep you alert, to keep you aware, and to keep you safe. And again, it's going to filter out all the examples where you were safe because that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to your survival. So then we grow into adulthood and we have what we believe is a completely objective view of how these parts of ourselves are fundamentally bad, wrong, terrible, shameful, and sinful. We have this fundamental understanding that we have all of these examples to prove that every time I was that way, every time I expressed that way, every time I was myself, I was rejected, I was abandoned, I was abused, everyone hates it, everyone doesn't like it, everyone rejects me. Because our brains have been filtering and been hypersensitive to any moment where it seemed like that was the reality. And they have been filtering out any experience that didn't validate that. Okay? So then we take these things that we hate about ourselves because they were fundamentally unsafe to us in our childhoods, and we go out into the world, and generally speaking, we're then going to have, friends, neighbors, coworkers, other authority figures that also, from our perception, reject these things in us and don't like them and think they're wrong and think they're bad. And we're going to, again, hyper fixate on that. We're going to hyper look at that. And again, it's one of these things where we tend to be raised in cultures where what our caregivers reject and what our caregivers think are bad and wrong about us and what, our family of origin thinks is not okay about who and what we are is mirrored by our friends and our teachers and our church members and all the other authority figures that are in our life, because our caregivers don't live in a vacuum, right? Our caregivers have come up with their ideas about what is right and wrong and good and bad and acceptable and not acceptable because of the culture they lived in, because of the culture they were raised in, because of their caregivers, because of the church that they go to, because of the schools they grew up in, and all of these things, which are going to be similar to yours because generally speaking, right, you were raised in a culture. You were raised in a context that your caregivers are a part of. So you're not going to have the experience of your caregivers rejecting all of these things about you, and then you go to school and everyone at school thinks it's great. Because generally speaking, the kids that you go to school with are going to be being raised with the same kind of beliefs and the same kind of understandings and the same kind of ideas that your caregivers have, because you live in a community, you live in a context. It's not going to be common that everyone around you is completely different in their mindset to how your caregivers believe, right? This is why a lot of people, when they go to university for the first time or move away from home and move out of their neighborhood and move out of their city and move out of their thing, all of a sudden realize that there's all these other ways of life that they had no idea existed, right? Because they were not exposed to that. We were just exposed to what our caregivers were exposed to, generally speaking. So what our caregivers planted the seed about being bad about us, culture is probably going to water. Our culture that we were raised in is going to water that, right? So what my caregivers rejected in me, I went to school and my teachers and my friends and my church groups rejected those same things because my caregivers were getting their cultural this is what is right and this is what is wrong messages from the same people that I was then going and interacting with. You see? It's not all happening in a vacuum, and it's not just our caregivers. it then becomes greater society. And this, again, right, is our fundamental baseline of what we're learning is right and wrong and good and bad and safe and not safe in our formative years. This is why this is so profound. Okay, we're learning this on a nervous system level. And it appears to us to be what everyone in the world thinks. It appears to us to be what everyone in the world believes, because it's everyone we're exposed to. And even if we are then exposed to a few people who don't hate or shame or blame these parts of ourselves, who don't reject them, who don't think they're bad, we're going to have a really hard time knowing what to do with that. And like I say, our brains and our bodies are likely going to just filter that out, because that's how our perception works. You see? So then we are going to come into adulthood with this belief that we are fundamentally, completely correct about what is shameful and bad and wrong about us. Because not only did our caregivers reject it, so did everyone around us, according to our minds, which would have filtered out anyone who didn't, or would have just hyper-fixated on everyone who was, which, again, likely would have been mirrored in your culture, because your caregivers don't live in a vacuum. Your caregivers got their belief systems from the culture they were raised in, which is probably the culture they raised you in, which means you were raised in a group where everyone believed the same stuff, generally speaking. So what they rejected in you, your friends probably rejected in you, your teachers probably rejected it in you, your church groups, all of these other places, because it was all the same culture. And this is why it gets so mind-fucky, right? Because in real reality, most of us are going to find that in our adulthoods, we can learn to accept and embrace who and what we really are. And we can be okay. We can get our needs met. We can still provide for ourselves. We can even find groups of people who believe that who and what we are is good, who think that we are totally acceptable how we are, who are able to meet our needs where our caregivers were not able to meet our needs, who are able to be there for us in ways that our caregivers were not able to be there for us. We're going to find that it's not everyone that believes this, but that, again, is going to be really challenging and really difficult because, again, how our minds work and how our bodies work and how we're programmed is, in order to feel safe, we are going to seek what is familiar to us. So even as we enter into adulthood, where we have so much more freedom and so much more option and access to different people and different cultures and different ideas, we are likely not going to be attracted to people who genuinely think that who and what we are is okay. We are not going to be attracted to a different culture and a different way of being and different thoughts, because those things are not familiar to us. Even if we're exposed to them, it's going to feel weird, it's going to feel scary, and generally speaking, another tricky, fun part about this is because we have been so indoctrinated to hate these things in ourselves, we are then going to go out and hate these things in other people. So rather than seeing these other people who are like us, who are similar to us, as safe places that we can go and get validated and loved and supported, a lot of the time we are going to see these people as dangerous and bad and wrong and shameful. because they're reflecting back to us these parts of ourselves that we believe are shameful, dangerous, wrong, and bad, because they disconnected us from our caregivers and made us unsafe. You see? So rather than just being able to go out and be like, oh, there's this whole other group of people who believe all these other different things and live these ways of life that totally align with me in a much better way. Great. I'm going to go frolic in the fields with them. We have been so indoctrinated that these things are wrong, bad, shameful, and harmful, that we see these people as dangerous. We see these people as wrong. Or we just don't even see them at all. We don't believe they exist. We can't validate their ideas. Even if they exist, and even if they are saying it is okay to be this way, we can be this way. See, we're like this and it's fine. We're going to look at them and be like, no. There's something, either, you're different than me, you have something I don't have, that's for other special people, that's not for me. We're not going to be able to accept that they are an example of something different. And maybe I can be that too and be okay. Because again, the nervous system is so trained that being that way and doing those things is harmful, dangerous, bad, wrong, and scary, that the mind is going to reject it. Okay? So you can see why we would have such a hard time embracing our uniqueness when in our nervous systems we learned that it is fundamentally dangerous to be that way because it separates us from our caregivers, which is, again, that first nervous system program we ever got, which is acceptance and love by those outside of me equals safety. Rejection of those outside of me equals not getting my needs met. So I have to change myself. I have to fix myself. I have to alter myself. I have to make myself what the people around me are, what they are accepting of, what they approve of. Otherwise, I am not safe. And then I go out into culture and everyone mirrors that back to me, and my perception is doing my perception's job of filtering out all the evidence that would support that there's a different way of life and that I can be okay, and of hyperfixating on all the examples of how it is true. I have to hate this part of myself. This is fundamentally bad. I am fundamentally broken. Look at all of these people who reject me. Look at all these people who believe this. Look at this. This is what everyone thinks. This is what everyone feels. If I were to be this way, I would be rejected by everyone. I would be alone forever. I will never be able to be myself and be accepted. And that then just becomes our story. That becomes how we live. We are attracted to the people who mirror that because that's familiar to us. We are unattracted to the people who don't mirror that to us because that's unfamiliar to us and existentially unsafe. So the story just keeps getting built and built and built and built and built until we get to that place where we're just like, yeah, it's fundamentally true. It is a fact. These things about me are bad. And it's never going to be okay to be this way. You see? It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's not just in our logic. So as we start to try to process through this, we need to understand that when we first begin trying to accept ourselves for who and what we are, the thing that is going to happen is all of our wildest fears are going to come to the surface. When we first start to try to embrace our uniqueness, the stories in our mind that tell us, no, you are fundamentally broken. You were rejected for a reason, and it is because you are shitty. You are not one of these special people who is just different, and the world needs to learn to see your brightness and let you shine. The story that you are not going to be safe, that you'll never be loved by anyone, that you'll be alone forever, that you're a failure and you will never achieve your goals and you will never get to where you should be in life. You'll never reach your potential. These are all the stories that are going to come up. And they are going to come up louder and stronger and more forcefully than ever. Right? Most of us think, as I start to try to love myself, it should be that I start to discover these parts of myself. I start to discover my needs. I start to discover my true identity. And then I can just start living as my true self. And it's so great. And isn't that fun? But that is not what happens. Okay? First thing is, again, we're going to start to try to accept and embrace that we're not bad, wrong, shameful, and guilty, that we're not fundamentally fucked up, and that survival child part of you is going to peek its head out and it's going to be like, no, you cannot believe that. I will not let you let go of these stories. And here, look, all the evidence. Everything that you've collected over your entire lifetime, where you filtered out anyone who was nice to you, where you really focused in on how it was true that you were broken, and every single person who's ever said anything horrible to you or had a facial expression towards you or microaggressed you, it comes to the surface. This is what everyone believes is going to come up. And the whole idea that if there isn't anyone in your life right now who can support you and love you and protect you and accept you for who you are, if there aren't like a million examples in your head of how that could be okay, you're going to be like, no, right? Because that part is trying to say, I learned that if you accept and embrace your uniqueness, you will die. So I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to keep you safe by making sure that these stories that you have in your head that have been stopping you from being your real self come up louder and louder and louder. Because I do not want you to risk being hurt, being rejected, and being alone and not getting your needs met. That's why I always say that inner critic, that part of you that shames, blames, and guilts you, that tells you that you are fundamentally bad and broken and it really is true about you, that you are the one example of a person who just doesn't belong on this earth and you shouldn't be here and you are just fundamentally broken, that voice is trying to protect you. It learned that love from the outside is the only way to survive. It is not aware that you are now an adult who can meet your own needs, that you are now an adult who does not depend on the absolute approval of everyone around you in order to survive. That voice is the child voice in you that still fully, fundamentally feels like if you are rejected, you will die. That is why it comes up so strong. And that's why it feels so true. That is why it feels like it's reality. Because to your nervous system, it is. Right? This is not coming from your adult logic that can see that you are now an adult who can figure things out for yourself, who can set yourself up to have a life that works for you, even if your caregivers don't approve of you, even if your church doesn't approve of you, even if the people around you right now don't approve of you. Right? That part that is screaming at you that you are broken, bad, wrong, shameful, sinful, will die if you are your real self, is that child part of you that can only see, if I am rejected, I will die. And so that is why it comes up that strong. And that's why it feels like it's true. Okay? And again, I often teach people how to tell the difference between a thought that is true and a thought that is not true by teaching you that a true thought is never going to feel like it's crushing you. A true thought is never going to feel like it's shrinking you and like the world is caving in on you and you have no hope and everything is over and it's the worst thing in the world. That's a feeling that is familiar to a lot of us. It is familiar, but it is not true. When we are thinking a true thought, even a true thought that is painful, okay? Because again, we can think a true thought of like, yeah, maybe my caregivers will never accept me the way that I am. And that might hurt, right? But it's not going to feel like the end of the world when we're in alignment with what is true, because as adults, we can still be okay, even if our caregivers don't accept and approve of us. We can still get our needs met. We can still provide for ourselves in a way that we couldn't when we were children, even if we're still semi-dependent on our caregivers. We're still not going to be in a state where their rejection equals we die today. Most of the time, like 99.999% of the time, you can probably look at your life and see, even if my caregivers reject me and don't approve of me, I am still okay. I can still be okay. You see? So when we think these horrible, painful thoughts of like, no, it is fundamentally true that who and what I am is shameful, wrong, bad, broken. That part that comes up that makes you feel like you're being crushed, like your sternum is being ripped in half, like your gut is being pulled out, like you're paralyzed, that's your body telling you that this is an untrue thought. And even though it feels familiar, and even though you have all the kinds of stories to back it up, it's not true in real reality in your adult situation. And that is what we need to start to learn to offer ourselves. Is this awareness, like even just becoming aware that that voice that is shaming you so hard is a child voice. It is not an adult, complete view of real reality. Is that first step we need to take. And then we have to understand that learning to accept ourselves means that we are then going to have to renegotiate our relationship with these parts of ourselves that we hate. And that is going to be unpleasant, right? It's not all about, again, like I say, finding your authentic expression and just like realizing you're an artist and going into painting and everything is great because now I accept myself and it's fine. What's going to come up is chronic illness and chronic pain that your caregivers never actually cared for you within, that is still there, that you now have to learn how to stop rejecting and shaming and blaming in yourself so that you can figure out how to support yourself. What's going to come up is a bunch of negative emotions, anger, sadness, that you were never allowed to feel, that you were never allowed to express, that your body still thinks if I express anger or if I express sadness or if I say I don't like something, I'm going to get rejected and I'm going to die. We then have to learn how to be our own parent who can express our anger and feel our sadness and not reject ourselves. Because what we're going to notice now is that caregivers are probably not even around. People aren't around. When you feel anger, the person that's rejecting you and telling you that it's bad, wrong, and shameful and that you're not allowed to be that is you. However, there's likely also going to be the reality that the spiritual teachings you've been attracted to, the self-help stuff you've been attracted to, the people you listen to online have all been telling you the same bullshit stories that your caregivers told you. Because, like I said, those things that we culturally learned in our childhoods to reject in ourselves, and these stories that we got about what is an appropriate way to be and what is a right thing to do, become our worldview. And then we continue to seek that out. We seek out the people who teach that. We seek out the people who believe that. We seek out the people who also live that in our adulthoods, because that's what's familiar to us. So we're going to be like, no, it's not just me telling me that my anger is wrong. It's my spiritual teaching telling me that my anger is wrong. It's not just me telling me that I'm weak and terrible for being, chronically ill. That it's my fault and I just am making bad choices. It's my whole health community that's telling me that. They're all believing the same lies because they were all raised in the same culture. You see? So it's going to be challenging to then learn to make space for your authentic self. And for most of us, we're going to have to go through this existential process, which is really hard and really scary, where we say, okay, I might have to accept that this is how I am, that this is who I am, that I've been working my whole life to try to change it and fix it and make it different, and I've never been able to. Maybe I am just bad, wrong, and shameful. Maybe the world is never going to accept me. Maybe out there is always going to look at me as being wrong and bad. But that does not mean that I have to live the rest of my life feeling that way about myself. This, I think, is one of the hardest things that I have personally had to go through, and that everyone that I know who has ever learned to love and accept themselves also had to go through. This period of saying, okay, maybe I'm just bad. Maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe the whole world will hate me for the rest of my life. How am I going to learn to love myself anyways? And as easy as I'm making that sound right now, right? For most of us, this is going to feel like death. Like, I remember when I went through this process where I just finally came to that place of like, okay, right? I've been trying to fix myself for my whole life. I have been trying to fix myself. I have been shaming myself. I've been rejecting myself. I've been trying to be what other people want me to be for decades. And I've never succeeded. And to the degree that I've ever been accepted, it's always felt awful because I have not been accepted for who I really am, right? I'm getting acceptance for this version of me that isn't really me. And to the degree that I've failed, and I'm just constantly beating myself up and constantly telling myself that I'm broken and constantly telling myself that I'm failing, it's miserable. And I got to, and I think most of us have to get to a place where we're literally willing and ready to give up on that. To give up on the idea of ever being approved of by our caregivers, to give up on the idea of ever being approved of by society, and realizing that if we have ourselves approving of us, if we have that sense of, okay, but I'm going to be here for me. I'm going to learn to love me. I'm going to learn to accept me. I'm going to learn how to make space for who and what I really am. And that means that I will always have somebody who's here on my side loving me. Because again, for most of us, we're going to be able to look around and say, all of this striving isn't getting me what I'm wanting anyways. All this trying to fix myself, all this trying to change myself, all this trying to measure up to expectation, it's never once led to actually having the connection that I want. I still feel alone. I still feel isolated. I still feel terrible in the things that I'm doing. It's not working. So at the end of the day, my two choices are continue down this path of trying to fix myself and change myself and feeling empty and feeling like no one who actually loves me knows me because they don't, and all of this stuff. We have to kind of come to that breaking point of like, well, if it means that no one else loves me, at least I can learn to love myself. And I can learn to be on my own side. And I can learn to advocate for myself and take small actions to support myself and get my needs met and be on my own side and figure things out, even if it means the world rejects me. Like, it's not about finally getting to a place where the world sees our uniqueness as special and validates us. Is we have to get to that place inside where it's like, my two options are to continue to live my life where I am invalidating myself for the rest of my life and feeling like shit, because the chances that I'm going to become the thing that everyone wants me to be are slim to none. Or I'm just going to accept that I am the way that I am, and I'm going to find a way to live a life that works for that version of me. And that is really hard. And it feels really scary. And it often will come with those stories of like, hey, but if you do that, you're going to die. You're not capable of providing for yourself. You're not capable of doing these things for yourself. If you just accept yourself and everyone leaves you, you'll die. But I guarantee you, that is not going to be true. On the other side of that kind of existential break we have to have with ourselves, where we just accept that maybe we'll never be fully loved by anyone outside of ourselves and we have to get on our own side, that is when the breakthroughs are going to start to happen. That is when we're going to be able to start to learn to comfort that inner child that has shamed and blamed and guilted us forever. That is when we're going to learn how to step into our adult perspective so that we can see that we can be rejected and we can be okay. That is when we're going to start to be able to process the pain that we've been through in being rejected. And we're going to be able to be upset at our caregivers and upset at them instead of continually turning that shame and blame and guilt on ourselves. Because again, a lot of us don't realize we're doing this. We're actually feeling mad, angry, sad, disappointed in our caregivers for how much they let us down. But instead of being able to process that, that inner child is coming up and being like, you can't be mad at them. They're your source of everything. And so we direct that anger and that shame and that blame in on ourselves. So this is another part of what's going to happen when we start to accept ourselves. Is all that anger and that sadness and that pain that we've been turning in and that we've been using as fuel to try to fix ourselves is going to start to come out as anger and sadness and grief about how we were treated. And we're going to need to learn how to process those emotions. And that's not fun. And it's painful and it's hard. But it's doable. And then again, we can start to feel that freedom of like every time that inner critic comes in, we can see, oh, you're just trying to protect me. You're just trying to keep me safe. You're just trying to blame me so that you don't have to face the existential crisis of caregivers being incapable. Because that is who your nervous system was programmed to believe you needed for everything. So to try to then conceptualize that they were fucked up and that they fucked up is going to feel really existentially scary for a little while. Right? And then we slowly come into our adult perspective where we can start to say, okay, wow, all of this indoctrination, all of this conditioning, all of this pain, all of this stuff, I can process and work through it. And I'm an adult now. And things are really, truly different now. I actually can provide for myself. I can figure things out for myself. I can do this. And as we become people who are learning to accept and embrace ourselves, our judgments of how we treat other people are going to change. When we do this work for ourselves, we then become the lighthouse beings who can demonstrate to the rest of the world that it is safe to be all different kinds of ways. If we can conquer that mountain of self-acceptance, we are going to find that we then become actually compassionate, inclusive people who are able to truly empathize with and understand and make room for other people who live differently than us, who think differently than us, who move differently than us, without seeing them as a threat. And this is what we need in order to be able to make the world a safer place. Because I guarantee you, everybody who's living a life out there right now where they are shaming, blaming, and guilting other people for how they are doing it out of self-protection. They're doing it to try to gain power because they don't actually believe that they have it. They're doing it to exploit because they are rejecting and shaming and guilting themselves. They are working from survival and childhood understanding, not from their adult perspective. It's violent and it's awful, and it's a childhood program that they're running. They are working from fear and shame and blame, and they're projecting it into the world around them. And our systems are built on it right now. Our systems are literally built on self-rejection. And then, right, we could go into the whole, and that's how they get us to be great consumers and great producers. Because a whole culture of people who hate themselves are then incredibly vulnerable to all the marketing of like, well, yeah, you are terrible. You need this product. You need to do this. You need to achieve that. You need to be involved in this. You need to wear that. You need to do this. Our culture is invested in us constantly hating ourselves so that we will continue to participate in the exploitation that is our culture. So the more we learn to love and accept ourselves, the more we're going to be able to show up for ourselves, support ourselves, and be in our adult perspective, which is actually going to make us feel better. And then the less we are going to be vulnerable to all the marketing and shit that has us consuming things we don't need, producing things we don't need to be producing, involving ourselves in systems that are harmful to ourselves and others. And the more we are then going to demonstrate how to be the kind of people that make other people safe. Like genuinely, truly safe. Because we know how to do it for ourselves. We then are going to know how to do it for others. So this whole process is incredibly important. It's hard and it's scary and it's existential. This is why, again, I said my mystery school is 5 years long. This is why I have a gabillion YouTube videos. This is why I do one-on-one coaching, because this work is not easy. Everything I laid out in this video here today, I'm saying it, I'm giving you the map, but walking it is a totally different thing. And so I want to validate that. I'm not just saying you should be able to just turn around tonight and have your existential crisis and then love yourself and then everything's great. That's not what it's going to look like. It's going to be messy, it's going to be complicated, but to choose that you are dedicated to learning to love yourself, to choose that you are dedicated to learning to accept and embrace yourself and to heal that inner child that truly believes you'll die if you do. To make that choice is life altering and it will set you on a different trajectory. That is going to be hard and scary and complicated, but also it will set you free. It's a choice we have to make, and then we have to make it over and over and over again. And in time, it will feel better. At first, it will feel worse. At first, you're going to feel like you're going to die and it's impossible. At first, you're going to have to be checking in with your thoughts like 24/7. That invalidating voice is just going to be there constantly. But progress will be made if we choose the new way. The new way will lead us. Okay? So let this be an inspiration that maybe today is the first day of this new life you're going to live, where you're going to learn to love you no matter what. You're going to learn to accept you no matter what. And you're going to let the journey take you, and you're going to accept it for what it is. Let's see what happens if we do that. Okay? Okay. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful on some level. And until I see you again, have a good day, week, month, year, whenever I see you. Talk to you again. Bye.